welcome to the show. Now, the conversation around the Independent National Electoral Commission's budget for the 2023 general elections is ongoing, and election observers are worried that the 2023 polls budget is seemingly over-bloated. Now, of the proposed 305 billion naira budget, INEC says 161 billion naira will be required for electoral, operational and administrative costs, while 117 billion naira is slated for electoral technology and other costs. Now, it has ruled out electronic voting in next year's polls. Maybe it's because it's too close. Well, INEC has given a breakdown of the budget for the 2023 general elections while trying to tell Nigerians that it's very important for Nigerians to actually know how much is being spent at the moment and what needs to be done ahead of the polls to guarantee credibility. Chairman of INEC, Mahmud Jega, gave the breakdown at the public presentation of the 2023 election project plan in Abuja.
In the 2022 Appropriation Act, the National Assembly approved a budget of 305 billion naira for INEC. Out of that figure, the electoral body says not less than 239 billion, which constitutes over 78% of the budget, will be spent on 10 critical items alone. 105 billion naira will be spent by INEC on procuring accreditation devices, 27 billion naira for possible runoff elections, while about 24 billion naira will be spent for ad hoc staff. 23 billion naira has been earmarked for election logistics expenses, which incorporates the movement, deployment, and retrieval of men and materials. INEC will spend about 21 billion on the printing of ballot papers and almost 13 billion on the procurement of non-sensitive materials. Printing of result sheets will cost the electoral body 9.5 billion naira, while procurement of ballot boxes will gulp nearly 13 billion naira. The procurement of operational vehicles is expected to cost about 4 billion naira. The budget for the 2023 general elections is a sharp increase of about 60% over the 189 billion naira spent in 2019.
Well, for analysis on this, I'm being joined by former Commissioner for Information in Adamawa State, Ahmad Sajoh, and then, of course, we're being joined by Arise Analyst Mahmud Jega, who help us understand all these figures. Welcome to the show. Let me start with you, Ahmad Sajoh. It looks like Nigeria's elections are becoming too expensive, very costly. What do you have to say about that?
I think it's not just the elections. I think our democracy is too costly. We've certainly just adopted for ourselves systems that are very, very costly for us to run. Everything about our democracy revolves around cost. I have had cause to speak here that our politics is highly transactional, and because of that, you know, the cost component becomes unbearably high. But when it comes to elections, we are only looking at the cost as per the budget. Look at the cost of us, you know, stopping people from going out to conduct their normal activities on election day. If you quantify the amount of losses we suffer because of that, you know, you literally bring the economy to a halt just because you want to conduct an election. And we've increased the stakes by creating tension and increasing the prevalence of security agencies, making election zones to become actual nearly war zones with security men breathing down everybody's neck, some security task forces stationed somewhere at a striking distance, and I think we are getting it really too wrong. And then another thing I have looked at is that there ought to be certain materials that may have depreciation but could be preserved for 2 or 3 election cycles. I wonder why we must continue to buy ballot boxes every now and then, every election cycle. I think there are a lot of things we are doing, and I also believe that sometimes, you know, you hear some huge sums of money being given as ad hoc staff allowances. But at the end of the day, you hear ad hoc staff again demonstrating after the event that they were not paid and all that and all that. I think we need to be a little bit more transparent in the manner we put across expenses for our election. But again, it's necessary. You can't have democracy without elections. The concept of democracy itself is tied to choice, and the best way we can organize the choice is through an elective process. So it's quite expensive, and like they said, the value of the Naira would also definitely affect. I'm a village person, you know, in very close to Cameroon, and we normally gauge the value of the Naira not by dollar but by sefa. That shortly before you wanted 1,000 sefa, you spend like 500 and something Naira. But today, 1,000 sefa is more than 1,000 Naira, which to us tells us that it's more than doubled.
Wow. Okay, Mahmud, he's actually set the template, but let's look at the expenditures. 305 billion naira, and then the procurement of voting materials alone, you can see the figures very high. INEC says it's going to be spending most of this money on about 10 critical items, and the critical items it's outlined ballot papers, operational vehicles, ballot boxes, allowances of ad hoc workers, printing of result sheets, logistics, and procurement of accreditation devices, and it goes on. What do you make of this?
You see, there is even one very huge cost which I do not see in this plan, which is the security element. Because 2 policemen, sometimes even immigration and civil defense per polling unit, and then they have a police mobile team, I think in every ward or local government, and there are even military contingents that are hiding somewhere. You just see them
at
on
least
the street.
Within the outskirts of the town.
They are there. So it's a huge cost, and we are not even talking about the cost to the political parties and to the candidates, and as well as Ahmed said, also the cost of the lockdown when everybody has to stay at home. But you see, Oga Samna, there is a very interesting take on the cost of election that I had nearly 20 years ago in Kaduna when I was a new Nigerian. The then chairman of INEC, the late Dr. Abel Gobadia, he came to our office. And the 2003 election, the cost was 45 billion naira. And we asked him that this is too much, 45 billion just the whole election. He said yes. 90% of it we are paying for the cost of our indiscipline. He said it is the cost of the indiscipline in Nigerian society that is responsible for it. He said, look, you virtually mint the ballot paper. He said, I went on election observation in Sri Lanka and in Bangladesh. He said it is a primary school notebook that they will put ruler and line it and tear it, and people line up and everybody is given just a small piece and he writes the name of the candidate. But in Nigeria, he said you have to mint the ballot paper. You can't even do it here in Nigeria. You do it secretly abroad in Germany or in Poland, and then you put Air Force planes to go secretly and fly it into the country. And when they fly it, you tell every resident electoral commissioner that he should come and collect his own, and he will come with 2 truckloads of mobile policemen because to move ballot paper from here.
That's why it's called sensitive material.
Exactly what they call sensitive material. And it leads to other things, you know, like this material could be distributed several weeks before the election. One of the reasons why we have delays on election day. But what they call sensitive election material, they cannot share it until the morning of the election, just to keep secrecy, and that is what causes all kinds of problems. So really what Gobadia said is the same issue. We are paying for the indiscipline of Nigerian society. He said when he mentioned at a meeting of African Electoral Commissioners the security arrangement, that okay, we have 2 policemen per polling unit, then we have this strike. They said why? He said in Nigeria.
Trust deficit.
The former INEC chairman told a story. He said he went to Kenya on election observation, and they went to a rural area in the night before the election, and they saw the electoral officer in the night. He said he was sitting in one primary school, there was even no light. He had a bush lamp on his, and on his side he had the ballot box and all the so-called sensitive printing material. 9 p.m. he was waiting for morning for the voters to come and start voting. If you do that in Nigeria,
of course,
you
would have seen what happened recently in the southeast. I mean, in Imo State, where some just registration, voter registration, where we could see that electoral violence. I'll come to you. We've seen INEC increasing even the number of polling units in Nigeria. I mean, about 56,872 polling units were added to the additional close to about 120,000 polling units that we had previously, which has made the distribution of both sensitive and non-sensitive election materials a logistics nightmare for INEC. Let's talk about how INEC will be managing these elections for us, because we're already hearing some people saying that even with this 305 billion naira, it looks like it's not enough.
No, but let us also understand some things. I was in a situation room during the last FCT elections, and one very surprising thing is that some of the polling units that have been created recorded 0 votes.
Yeah, I mean,
a number of them recorded 0 votes. Some recorded 1 or 2, which questions the rationale behind creating even new polling units. The old system was that where a polling unit has a large number of people, you create a new voting center adjacent to that polling unit to accommodate the overflow of voters. But they've created polling units that if the rehearsal we had in Abuja is anything to go by, a number of these new polling units will also record 0.
Well, INEC actually explains, sorry to just cut in here, INEC actually explains that it's based on the growing demography of the voting population, because, I mean, some estates have sprung up now, and then, you
I agree with you.
Thousands of persons
but where
there,
you have an election,
walk on election
but where
day.
you have an election and a polling unit records 0, it does not preclude the fact that INEC will send electoral officials to that place, it will send ad hoc staff to that place, security agencies will be in that place. All of these are costs. And then when you factor all these costs for a 0 voter turnout in one particular location, you see, this has bloated the cost for no value, apparently.
To the Nigerian public.
Apparently. So what we are saying is that, like my brother said, we're paying for our indiscipline. But beyond paying for our indiscipline, INEC itself, they will tell you that they have put in some money for operational vehicles, fair and good. But at the end of the day, they will also tell you that, like it happened in Anambra. Again, I'm using examples of what happened, not what would happen or would have happened. Like it happened in Anambra, INEC had an arrangement with NURTW to move materials, and somehow the road transport workers did not play their own part, and the electoral materials were abandoned somewhere.
Yeah, that was for fear of violence.
Exactly.
And that's why you need the police.
But you have all this, if you're paying so much for logistics, and then the logistics do not carry the ballot papers and the materials to the voting center. What is the essence of the payment for logistics? I think we need to do a lot of things to get it right. Look at the electronic thing we're talking about. Both in Anambra and in Abuja, INEC did fairly well. But there are a lot of loopholes that we need to cover. There are a lot of things we need to do, even if the voting itself is not electronic, but so many other things like the transmission of results, like the compilation of results, can be done real time. And we're looking forward to that in the next cycle of election.
Okay. Now, let's look at one factor here. INEC is budgeting 27.1 billion naira for a possible runoff election that may happen, that may not happen. Now, I've been close to some INEC people, and I remember 2011 elections when I covered, and I saw how we had this, runoff election materials just discarded after the elections, and I was like, how could we have printed so much of these forms and, you just waste it like that. And that was the same election year where we forgot some of our ballot papers in South Africa. Remember when the force couldn't bring all of them in? Looking at the huge amount,
the numbers.
Looking at the huge amount we are budgeting for a possible runoff that may not happen. Let's take a look at that. 27.1 billion naira.
It's not the fault of INEC per se, because if the Constitution makes provision for an election system that could result in a runoff election, as the election management body, they have to plan for that. You see, lack of capacity in the country, and also all this deficit of trust is part of the problem. Otherwise, you don't have to print the ballot paper for the runoff election. You can wait until you see the outcome of the first round of election, like they did in France just recently. Okay, if 2 people are going for the runoff, then we can quickly print the ballot paper. But if you do that, you run the risk of just what you are saying, what happened when we abandoned papers in South Africa. Because if you don't have the capacity within the country to do that, you will have to order it in Germany or in Poland.
Mahmoud, considering the number of years Nigeria has got independence and how many elections we'll be able to run, how can it be that a big country like this cannot have the capacity to print ballot papers for a possible rerun? Why would we have to outsource this to other countries and depend on them?
It's not because we cannot print them inside the country. We do not trust anybody in Nigeria to print.
So no printer is good enough.
That's what go. But no, it's because of the secrecy. Because you don't want anybody to even know where you are printing. Even within INEC, maybe not more than 2 or 3 people will know the printer in Germany that is printing. And when you finish it's almost like printing money. It's almost like printing money. I remember the late Postmaster General Argungu. That time we interviewed him in 2003, and we said, look, what Gobadia said about this distribution difficulty. Why can't, he said, in India, electoral materials, the so-called sensitive ones, are distributed through the post office. All these ballot papers, the Central Election Commission of India will just go to the post office and post them and say, buy the local government in Imo State, and it will arrive there. He said, why can't we do it here? He said, yes, the post office in Nigeria, we can do it, but we will not do it. We said, why? He said, because if politicians know that my post vans are carrying ballot paper, all of them will be waylaid on the road, and the drivers will be killed. So I can do it, but I will not do it. So it's probably the same thing with the printers. There is a printer maybe in Lagos or even in Abuja who can print the ballot paper, but he will say, look, INEC, please take this because if the politicians know I'm printing ballot paper, only God knows.
And a clear example to back up your point is actually what's happening at the APC. I mean, printing of expression of interest and nomination forms had to be postponed because of our issues with logistics. Now, let's talk about how we are spending these huge monies on ad hoc workers. About 1 million people will be receiving 23.7 billion naira payment as a reimbursement for having decided to work with INEC temporarily for all of this. Let's talk about that huge amount of money. Are we making the best use of our resources?
Well, there is nothing you can do. If it says that for every polling center, for any voting center, let's use the word voting center, where elections are going to take place, you need a presiding officer, an assistant presiding officer, recorders, and you need a minimum of 5 staff in addition, apart from the security agents that are going to be there. These guys, they are going to render a service. They must be paid for their services. There's no argument about it. The only thing is, you see, most of our budgeting system in Nigeria is opaque because nobody asks you to render an account at the end of the exercise. At worst or at best, the members of the National Assembly will invite you when you are defending the next cycle of budget to explain what happened last year. If we had a template where every activity, which is the best practice all over the world, at the end of every project or activity, you're supposed to render a report. And in that report, you have to capture everything, including your expenses, what happened. And then if there are excess or if there are deficits. But we don't do all of this. So you discover that this amount of money has been budgeted for ad hoc staff. At the end of the day, ad hoc staff, INEC ad hoc staff after the elections will form themselves into a group. They will demonstrate.
Yeah, some of them even sabotage the elections, and you just see them saying that, look, they have the materials, both sensitive and non-sensitive election materials, but they won't move them, or they won't start distributing, or they won't open the voting, the polling units because they haven't received their allowances.
And all of these things, we are working electronics, we're talking electronics, we are claiming to have gone digital in most of our operations. Why can't we be digital about this as well? Why not, arrange a situation where the man gets his pay almost as soon as he completes the assignment?
Maybe there's also a fear by INEC that if they are paid before election, they may just disappear into thin air.
Again, we are back to what my brother said. We're paying all of this for the indiscipline in our system. Why would I collect money from INEC and disappear? Just like, like we had the example of the Anambra thing. If the road transport workers were afraid due to security and the rest, why did they enter into contract with INEC? Collect whatever fees they were supposed to collect for moving these materials, only for them to disappear when the materials were supposed to move.
Like in the case of the ad hoc staff sometime abandoning, from 2011, INEC solved one problem and created another. Before 2011, it was mostly school teachers. It's the largest pool of staff that you draft during election. And those ones are usually very patient people. They finish the elections, they go home 1 month, 2 months, you didn't pay them. But from 2011, INEC decided to use NYSC people, who are of a higher educational level. And really they have greater capacity, especially when you want to use some technological tools. The problem is they are impatient. They are impatient. They are just out of the university, their head is still boiling. So that first year, here in the FCT, we had that election didn't start in some places because they said they were supposed to be paid 2 days earlier and they were not paid. So they refused to do the work, which if it is primary school teachers, they will do it and wait for 3 months. So sometimes you solve one problem and create
and shouldn't we be thinking of bringing people like NPower? I mean, some of these groups that at least INEC and the government has a database of all the people on NPower and all of that. Should we integrate them?
Yeah, maybe they are not better than NYSC. The good thing about NYSC is that you have a certain level of control because they are inside a core with commanders and state directors, so you can punish them if necessary, if they misbehave. And also they are easier to mobilize.
There's a data bank of them.
So probably it's a safer group. The only thing is you have to be careful with them, as we said, because they are restive and impatient.
Well, we'll just have to hold on now and then go on a short break. When we come back, the conversation continues on the cost of the 2023 polls compared to that of the 2019 elections. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the conversations. I'm Somna Sambo, and we've been having analysis about the cost of Nigeria's 2023 elections. And I have in the studio here with me Ahmad Sajoh, who is a former commissioner for information in Adamawa State, a journalist, and he's also here alongside Arise Analyst Mahmud Jega, who's also a journalist. Now, let's talk about INEC breaking down some of these costs. And one of the things that actually made me feel comfortable with what INEC said, I mean, when Mahmud Yakubu was doing this presentation, is that the cost of election per voter seems to have actually dropped. It says that in cost of election, average cost per voter in 2019 was $7.38, which is like about 4,000 plus Naira. And then it has dropped to $5.39 per voter, which is about 3,000 Naira. per voter. Now, while this has dropped, the cost has dropped, the number of voters has actually shot up. We had 84 million voters in 2019 elections, people who registered, not the actual people who came to vote though. But now they are expecting that we'll be having over 100 million registered voters in 2023. And then when you talk about the polling units, in 2019, we had 119,973 polling units. But in the next election, 2023, we will be having 176,846 polling units. Now, let's take a look at all of this. The cost, they say, is reducing per voter, but overall, it has shot up.
Of course.
Yeah, and then the number of polling units has shot up, and then the number of registered Nigerians will actually shoot up to about 100 million voters. In all of this, when we plan for these elections, unfortunately on election day, we will just see only like about 30% of the registered voters coming out. How do we prevent voter apathy in spite of all these investments?
One, I don't know in the breakdown how much is allocated for voter education. And you know, voter
very
education...
minimal.
Exactly.
Very,
voter
very
education
minimal.
receives very little cost. Of course, with the assumption that international agencies will intervene, you know, in various ways, directly through INEC and through other bodies. But I think the reason why we would not have, in calculating their cost per voter, they calculate it based on the number of polling units that they have and the voting centers.
Yeah.
Because for every voting center and the polling unit of voting center, you have to provide the same number of personnel and attention.
Yeah, the regulation is actually 500 voters per polling unit.
Yeah.
No. But beyond even that, even if you don't have up to 500, the facilities you provide at a polling unit are the same across board.
Yeah.
You don't, it doesn't go down because you are expecting 500 here, you have 10 ad hoc staff, and because you are expecting two people here, you have 2 ad hoc staff. We saw that in the FCT election in particular that I monitored, they have the same number of staff for all voting centers. Now, but, you know, voter apathy is something very serious in this election. I give you an example with the Anambra election. They have a population of nearly 5 million people or slightly above 5 million people in Anambra. But the eventual winner of the governorship emerged with 152,000 votes. That is seriously, you know, it even questions the concept of democracy. Is that actually ruled by the majority?
Yeah, I mean, even if you add up all the figures from the opposition, they're not more than just 200 and something thousand, and it was
not very good for our democracy. So we need to spend a little bit more money on voter education, and we need to also increasingly, you know, increase on the credibility of our electoral process. Some of the voter apathy you experience in our elections are tied to the credibility of the elections. When a person believes that his votes do not actually count, when they believe that they make no difference, whether they vote one way or the other, whether they go or they don't go. And again, you know, you have to realize that we also, those of us that are in the elite class, unless we have a direct interest in an election, we normally don't participate.
Yeah, I mean, it's always left to, I mean, they just say voting is for others.
Okay. Voter apathy. I think there is more responsibility on the part of the political parties and the candidates to mobilize voters.
That's what INEC has always been saying. But with a huge budget, shouldn't INEC also do more in terms of voter publicity?
Well, they can do more. And honestly, those of us who remember 1979, at that time, the INEC publicity directorate was headed by Alhaji Alade Oduneu. Extremely vibrant, you know, every day in the paper. But then
former
it was
editor of Daily Times.
Exactly. He was the National Commissioner for Public Enlightenment. That was what it was called. And he was on radio, television, newspapers every day. But I think it also had to do maybe with the credibility of that transition program and also the vibrancy of the political parties of that era compared to now. Now, you know, too many Nigerians, if you ask them which political parties they support, they don't even know. Nobody, exactly, everybody will tell you, well, maybe I will see the candidates, this and that, which was not the case in the Second Republic, where things were so tough. Everybody had a political party, marriages were being split, tenants were being ejected because of political relationship, brother and sister fighting, everything. Well, we thank God actually that things are not like that now, because that was not very healthy. But on the other hand, it made for a large voter turnout because everybody was waiting for polling day. But now
to go and deliver their candidates.
Exactly. But now many people think what is
but
that?
We are spending so much on these elections, and then we're having fewer voters. Aren't you concerned, Mahmud?
Well, unfortunately or fortunately, we are not the only ones. You know, even in Europe, usually voter turnout is about 30%. Even this French election that they had, you know, even in the US, I think it was 30-something percent. Now, you can only lead a horse to the river, but you cannot force it to drink. If people look at the candidates and the issues and they don't feel very much concerned, or they don't think they can make a difference, or they think it doesn't matter, even though the truth is that the credibility of our elections has improved in the last 10 years. I don't think people now are thinking that somebody will just sit somewhere and write the results that used to happen, or the way politicians used to snatch ballot boxes and go and stuff them. With the coming of the card reader, you don't do that, because even if you do it, it's useless. Nobody will count those votes. So there has been an increase, but really maybe because of the situation in the country, because like the Anambra case that you mentioned, I mean, security was a very big issue in the Anambra election. I mean, as you mentioned, somebody, an INEC officer was killed just because he was doing voters registration, not even the election. You can imagine the kind of message that sent.
With even a warning that there will be no election in the entire Southeast.
Exactly. So security. Now that's in the Southeast where the IPOB people, but in other parts of the country where there are insurgents, there are bandits, to come out and even start going to the polling station. So all these factors will impact on the voter turnout. We hope things will improve before the election.
Okay. Ahmad Sajoh, let's talk about funding away from the Nigerian government. INEC, in one way or the other, receives donor funding too. How do we ensure that INEC is more accountable very quickly as we try to round off?
I think this is what I'm trying to say, that the Nigerian people deserve a comprehensive report at the end of every project or assignment. It's not just INEC. It's supposed to be a national norm that whichever agency of government performs a strategic and an important assignment like managing an election cycle should be able to provide a report and at the end of it to the Nigerian public,
including the best ways to avert all the challenges.
Exactly, you know. So once we imbibe that, and those reports should be subjected to critical analysis, should be subjected to validation. You know, if once we are able to do that, we may be holding government officials more accountable. Okay. Like he said, you know, our election, the credibility of our elections have improved tremendously. But I think we can make it much more transparent if at the end of the day we provide an end of
very good thing you've raised there. I mean, but Mahmud, we've seen, I mean, even the Auditor General submitting reports to the National Assembly, sometimes it takes 5 years, 6 years. They haven't looked at it and all of that. That suggestion, I mean, do you support that, and who should be the recipient of that? Is it the executive or the legislature that should receive
both
such
of them
report?
also have a trust deficit problem. I think the issue is going forward, because this cost of election that we are talking about, we were complaining in 2003 it was 45 billion. Now it is 300 billion. It means if things continue like this, by 2027 it will be 400 or 450
if
billion.
not 500 billion.
That means we should have a complete rethink about the election system in Nigeria. And if it requires amending the constitution or amending the Electoral Act suitably, we should better do that. And there's nothing we can do about the next election because it's already at hand. But immediately after that, there should be a national soul searching about the method of election with a view to both credibility and transparency and the cost.
Yeah, but when we receive that report of INEC on what happened during the election day, security agencies on what happened during the election day, and the lessons learned and how future elections should be better.
Right now, certainly it is tabled with the presidency and it is also tabled with the National Assembly oversight committees. But the fact is it has not been very effective so far. It has not been very effective. We have not seen the serious lessons learned. Also, such things came out of it, like all the suggestions of amendment to the Electoral Act and all that, which sometimes get stalled. But what we need more than that is a complete rethink about the election system. And some of it may necessitate changing the constitution. Because otherwise, INEC cannot do anything. If the constitution and the Electoral Act say you must do this, then they have to do that.
Okay. Most thank you so much, Mahmud Jega, for your insight into all of this, especially having spoken to us about the previous elections, right from FEDECO, NECON, and all those nomenclatures. And Ahmad Sajoh here is a former commissioner for information in Adamawa State, a renowned journalist and PR strategist. So most thank you for being on the show alongside Mahmud Jega.